My whole family, super conservative Italian people. I used to be so hard on my grandma about her views. I'd be like, how can't you believe in gay marriage? Basic human rights. And then one day I asked her, I was like, what's your biggest fear? She goes, I don't know, I guess gypsies? That is funny. Well, it changed my whole perspective. I think how progressive your grandma could possibly be all depends on where she's coming from. She's living in fear of a gypsy takeover? She is not making it to transgender rights. Got him.
If her biggest fear are gypsies, there's no way she's going to get to where we want her to get because she's starting at such an antiquated worry. And there's too many hurdles she'd have to cross in between to get to what we want. I bet, if you took her, but you bore her 80 years from now, she would be on your side. You have to have empathy for her because you're eventually going to beat her. So it's kind of futile to be mad at her. You're kind of mad at yourself in the future in a way. The real thing is I'm worried I'll become that. So I'm going to be so outspoken against it to hide my worry.
So this isn't so much we're talking about why it's okay to laugh at old people. It's okay to laugh at ourselves.
Old people walking the mall. It's just a great part of our culture.
It happens everywhere and no one's talking about it.
Yeah. Or taking pictures of it. I don't know. It's just I swear, they're like a school of fish. They just go by in a mall. It's amazing.
There they go again.
Yeah. Oh, there go the minnows. That's what it feels like.
You can't laugh at that.
All right. Well, welcome to You Can't Laugh at That, the podcast where we take topics that aren't funny and we prove that they are funny. In a world that takes itself too seriously, we have to be able to do that. And joining us today is not Steve Mers. Steve has been canceled. Co-hosting in his place today is Jeremy Demery of the aforementioned Golden Ox Studio. What's up, Jeremy?
Who's never said anything cancelable or problematic ever in his life.
We canceled him because he's too funny.
That's good.
Smart.
Yeah.
Good move for a podcast.
This
guy's too good. We got to let him go.
He's stealing our thunder. And I feel like that's the way to get ahead in all lines of business is just try to get rid of the competition so you're the sole survivor.
Yep, that's how I've done it. One by one, I've cleared out my enemies.
I wait for something to oppose a threat, and then I kill it off.
Yeah.
I bring him close. And that's why the Rad Dudecast ended. You were like, these guys, we can't do this anymore.
Oh, no. There were all kinds of criminal charges that we need to distance ourselves from each other.
I set him up.
No, I'll tell you, I'll tell you honestly what happened. We did 100 episodes on Zoom during the pandemic, and we were like, we can't do this anymore. Oh my God, it was too much.
It's over. Well,
over a week during the pandemic on Zoom. Oh boy, I there were moments I would look at my external camera and just cry that I had to set it up. Oh God, sorry.
Only thing
trauma.
I've seen you in weeks.
Yeah, man. I can't look at my face anymore. It's a nightmare.
Oh, that was the weirdest part of doing Zoom shows. By the way, that's our guest. That's Anthony DeVito. Anthony DeVito killed off his competition so that he could do Colbert. He's been on Comedy Central just for laughs. You can check out his album Dream Occupation, which is anywhere you can find albums. There's a link for the album in the show notes. He's on Sirius XM, and you have a new podcast now, right?
I don't, but I'll make one up. Sure.
All right. What is it?
Baseball Times with Anthony DeVito, where we talk about life in the majors.
Got his co-host here, Jeremy the Gibbler.
Yeah, man. Jeremy the Jig.
Knows nothing about sports because he was homeschooled.
Oh, man. Yeah, and Ken Burns. He's also attached. So should be good. Each episode is 14 hours long.
and it's just a slow pan.
Yeah. It's a slow, you can't even see it. I mean, it's an audio medium. It's a slow pan. But Ken insists, and I feel bad.
Yeah, he's the creative director. That's great. You should bring in Bobby Bonilla for an episode. He's killing it.
So cool. That's so great. $1 million once a year. I like the Mets are starting to lean into it and like kind of celebrate it, which is like fun. But it's all due to because they invested with Bernie Madoff. Oh, it's so crazy.
It's great that they're leaning into it though, and that's just one of those things that when you fuck up, you gotta own it. The quicker you can move on, and that's a reason why we do this podcast for one, because people are so quick to like get defensive if they're not comics. Comics are obviously like, oh, this is material,
right?
But the regular human being is like, I'm gonna resist this, and I'm gonna cause myself more stress and pain, and we're gonna talk about old people who've spent their whole lives doing it.
Yeah, my favorite group of people, my favorite topic, the elderly.
I was actually just kind of skimming some articles about this. There's a Guardian article that this was right when Michael Shea did a joke on Weekend Update about a 60-year-old Chinese woman giving birth, and he described it as removing a penny from a wad of chewing gum. And there's this whole article, this think piece about the ageism epidemic, sure. as far as like we should cancel people for that.
Yeah, but then I only, my experience is like live with them, not only with my grandmother, but then also, on the road. I'm not in a position where I have fans that look like me. I play casinos with all 75-year-old people in the crowd, and they love those jokes. Like, like they're very, you're very aware of your situation, and like the best way to take the gravity out of it is to laugh at it. And also it's like they're getting attention, they're such a forgotten about group that has always bothered me, where it's like SNL, there was always this push for diversity, but then no one's like, well, we also need our token old person. Like no one does that. And it's like, yeah, they have a lot to offer. And but I just, people just don't like looking at old people because it reminds them of death. But it always kind of irks me that they're not really looked at as like still a functioning group in our society.
Do you think that's what it is? It's the reminder of our own mortality, that's going to be us one day, and
I think to some degree, yeah. For sure. Because you don't want to see your own mortality, and when you're seeing someone that age, you have to face it, and that's difficult, which I understand. Mm-hmm. But also, it's like, yeah, if we were more upfront about that, death might not be so scary.
Right. I love joking about death.
Yeah.
It's obviously not. I'm not going to open a set with it, but eventually.
Oh, I've tried and failed many times. Yeah. Sorry to interrupt. Go ahead.
No. It's tough to do in an open mic because with that you got to really work out the kinks. But if you open, you have a whole 5-minute chunk about death, and it's hard to open with that and win the crowd over. Because again, we resist it, but at the same time, it's the thing that brings us all together. It's like we have that in common.
Yeah, and it's that running clock which keeps life, interesting. Mm-hmm. With anything, if there's just no parameters, if there's no time limit on anything, like, you'll kind of take things for granted. But if there's going to be an end, you're much more willing to soak up everything that is life. They're so invaluable, the elderly, and they're just walked over or looked past, in my opinion. Mm-hmm.
It's an interesting point too that you made about SNL, like just the double standard of we want a diverse cast, but nobody can be over 35.
Yeah, exactly.
Larry David stop by. And throw him a bone once in a while. It happens.
Yeah.
But man, like that's when it was so good. Like, Daryl Hammond was younger, but when you had these cast members that were a little bit older, it just felt like such a more well-rounded show. Mm-hmm. And it's like, man, I would love to see, think about Betty White as a cast member and like all that potentially opens up, and like whatever new perspective you could gain from your sketches with her in them. Like, I don't know. I just think like they should be treated as any other group, because at some point you look, like at some point, age makes people, it doesn't matter their race. At some point, you're like, you're 70 and you're 20, and that's you could be anything, So it's like, I do think looking at them as like an actual group of people, which we do already. So why not just admit it? It could be really helpful.
The hours work out fine for people in that age.
yeah.
What a strange thing to do, like in your twilight years. Like, what do you want to do in your twilight years? I want to do SNL. I'm gonna get SNL.
Also, too, like how hopeful is that? You know what I mean? Because you get older and you're so limited. You can't drive, you can't do all these things. But if you could be cast on SNL, oh my God, what a New
Yorker, you don't need to drive.
Yeah, but you're limited in what you have. You don't have as much access to life as you once did. But if you still had the ability, you don't have to be a customer service rep for like taking calls for Amazon. You could be on SNL. Man, amazing.
There's no rule saying you can't. But you do have to. I understand you do have to be home by 8. So that's where the
That is the. I mean, they'll work that out. I'm not saying I've got everything worked out with this. You'd have to figure that part out. Where maybe you do some pre-tapes with her, but they are a cast member.
Yeah, they just do like a stand-in.
They're a great
during the actual recording.
They wake up at 4 a.m. and then they come in all refreshed when you guys are on your tail end. They just keep it rolling.
Yeah, man, when you're bloated, full of Chinese food, red-eyed, and then like they come strolling in with a packet full of ideas.
Drawing from experience.
Yes.
Having just walked a mall.
Yeah. Also, yeah. That's such a great, I don't know, that people need to, that needs to be seen more, or be like just old people walking the mall. It's just a great part of our culture.
It happens everywhere and no one's talking about it.
Yeah. Or taking pictures of it. I don't know. It's just they're like a school of fish. They just go by in a mall. It's amazing.
There they go again.
Yeah. Oh, there go the minnows. That's what it feels like.
And I love it too. For example, sports. The PGA Tour has a whole senior circuit.
Right.
Why don't they do that with more sports?
Great idea. I'd love to watch the senior NBA. You're absolutely right. This is a great idea, man. Senior everything. Just And
crazy thing is that Kareem Abdul-Jabbar would still dominate in the Citizen.
He's still pretty spry.
For sure. Dr. J, he made that cameo on The Office a few years back, still knocking down the dunks.
It is funny because you shrink as you get older, but like Kareem Abdul-Jabbar is now like 6'11". It's like, he's not 7'1" anymore. Boo hoo. Yeah, man, these guys still got it. But yeah, I mean, they would be so beneficial, especially in a writer's room, just because like having been in a writer's room where like I've seen the impact of diversity and like the importance for it and the real positive benefits of it. Having a person in there that's like, man, shut up, you young idiots. Like, no, the world is not like this, man, would be huge. Cause like, how many shows do you watch where it's just like, they're just sort of like, there's nobody in there with an opposing view or to be like, man, you're all wrong. Why? Because I lived till 70 years old.
I'm knocking on heaven's door here. You want to talk about your TikTok account?
Right, exactly. Yeah, man, I just think it would add so much. And a much needed, like, especially now, because like, it's like we're living in such a time where like, ideas hot takes just go unchecked out into the ether and then they become doctrine. So to have like a real voice that's in there that's like, I fought in Korea, none of this adds up, would be so cool.
Yeah. There should be a dissenting voice. There's too much of an echo chamber kind of feel to things, and one that's not perspective. Yeah,
not just being contrarian for contrarian's sake, but one that's just like, no, the world doesn't work like this because I know the world more than you.
Mm-hmm.
I was on the Titanic, and let me tell you, Kate Beckinsale isn't taking her shirt off for anybody. Those rooms were cold.
Ooh, it would have been nice if it was Kate Beckinsale.
Yeah, right.
Who was it?
Winslet.
But Winslet's all right, man. That's a great Kate.
Yeah.
Don't ever besmirch Kate Winslet around me, man.
That was not the intent.
and let's hope not, David.
For a lot of people, if your first boob was Kate Winslet, we need some more diversity. We need some more seasoning in the writer's room here.
Wait, are you saying Kate Winslet's boobs aren't good enough to be your first boob? Because I won't hear of it.
I'm saying that if that's how young you are, you don't know the world.
Yeah, you got it, David.
Some people do. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That Marilyn Monroe Playboy should have been the first one that you saw.
Yeah, somebody was telling me because they hadn't heard of Marilyn Monroe, and then they first heard of her like 5 years ago, and they were like, "Man, this Marilyn Monroe was hot," and you're like, "Yeah, what?"
Hey, she was very body positive.
Yeah, I don't know. The woman our president was cheating on his wife with. Yeah, I would imagine. Oh man, it was great.
Own boobs?
yeah. Wow, you don't say.
Wild time.
You know what's interesting too about, because we're talking about the elderly at shows, people always get like apprehensive, like they'll always be like, "Oh, there's a lot of old people here, like they're gonna be like buttoned up," and it's like they've seen everything. You know what I mean? It's like they're just like whatever I've done at 38 pales in comparison to what I will have seen by 36 or maybe by 76. I mean, you know, it's just you just accumulate years and you just accumulate trauma, and then you just get cold to it, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I can't jaded. Can't wait.
Yeah, but fun jaded. You know what I mean? You can be jaded in a way that's enjoyable.
Mm-hmm.
You know, where you're like that gruff cop, or that, like, you know what I mean? Like that person that just stares into the middle distance for hours. That's fun, you know?
What age do you think you transition from being weird to like eccentric?
Do you have like a more specific example of like what you might be thinking?
When you're younger, people are like, "Oh, that kid's weird," and then at one point they just stop saying that you're weird, and then they're like, "Oh, well, I guess he's just eccentric, and that's how he's always going to be."
Oh, that's cute. He paints birds.
Yeah, and only in green.
Yeah.
I think it's when they see who, like, because when you're a kid, like, oh, you're like worried about weirdness because you're like, what's that gonna look like when you get older? Is he gonna make it? You know? And then once you reach a certain age, they go, okay, this is who he is. He can now just be an eccentric. We're not worried about him anymore. This is just who he is, and he seems to be okay, so it's fine.
I think that's a good segue into your bit. Because the way that you set up your grandma, you introduce her as a character on this track in your album. It does a really good job of kind of like, this is who this person is, and here are the eccentricities, and they're funny because they're harmless, but also like I don't know, there's a whole lot to it. If you want to introduce the clip itself, then we'll talk about it. We'll break it down into a couple different chunks too.
For sure, man. So I think we're doing this is Vicky, this is Frank. Is that the title? Mm-hmm. I forget, man. It's a couple years ago.
Yeah.
So yeah, this is a bit about my grandmother, and then her meeting a guy in the nursing home. Take it away, David.
Take it away yourself.
I'm not taking it anywhere.
Also, too, I don't want to contribute to segues. I'm the derail guy.
Yeah.
That's what I'm here for. I derail things.
Totally.
Get it to different places. I don't segue.
Same, man.
I'm not.
But you need the guy, you need the derail guy, and you need the segue guy, because otherwise it's too far off course. And unfortunately I'm a derail guy too, so David's got an uphill battle on his hands for today.
He said that's a good place to segue, and I was so ashamed of myself. I am doing no good here.
Comedy's about making connections, and if I can find a way to connect something totally unrelated to what the direction the podcast is going to go, I'm going to take that.
No, bless your heart, man, because I'm trying to get this thing off course as much as I can. I'm trying to talk about baseball times.
Bobby Bonilla is a senior citizen at this point, right?
Good, man. You're good, David.
Wow, yeah, I have no idea who that is. Bobby Bonilla, is that a bubblegum flavor? What is
No, that's the guy that's getting that contract, man.
Oh,
It does sound like a bubblegum flavor, though. You're right.
Yeah. Bubble vanilla. That's what he should have done with his money.
You really get an understanding of how much tougher times were. Like gum, they would like talk about gum like it was like an afternoon activity, you know? Like we'll get some Bazooka Joe and just chew gum around each other. It's just like, Jesus Christ, life was horrible.
My whole family, super conservative Italian people. I used to be so hard on my grandma about her views. I'd be like, how can't you believe in gay marriage? Basic human rights. And then one day I asked her, I was like, what's your biggest fear? She goes, I don't know, I guess gypsies? It is funny. Well, it changed my whole perspective. I think how progressive your grandma could possibly be all depends on where she's coming from. She's living in fear of a gypsy takeover? She is not making it to transgender rights.
Got him.
She is racist. She is. It doesn't bother me, though. She's also in a wheelchair, so... yeah, it's not like her ideas are going anywhere.
Funny line, I forgot it. Good line, home run.
That's like a modern if a tree falls in the forest. If an old lady in a nursing home says the N-word and all her friends are deaf, did she really say it?
There's a lot packed into that.
Killer. What a talent.
Saying something racist was a government cover-up, really.
Let's dig. Let's get in there. What's that about? Yeah, man, I had so many more punchlines than I do now. It's kind of funny. I realized that.
It's super punchy. That's why I had to stop it after a minute 19, because it's like there's so much more after that, but we need to break that down a little bit first.
Let's break it down. Let's get our hands dirty, fellas.
Now it's the part where we break it down.
Love the misdirect up front. You have a conservative Italian family, and and then the first punchline, fear is gypsies. Like she's scared of gypsies. That's awesome. Number one, because we get so mad at older generations for not being progressive.
Right.
Again, we don't share, we haven't lived what they lived through. We don't take that into consideration. And so when you introduce the, conservative family, the conservative grandmother, the audience is going to think you're going another way with it.
Right.
But then you kind of develop this almost like sympathetic character.
Yeah.
Where it's like, oh, she's scared of gypsies. Like she's not going to make it to transgender rights.
Yeah. You're expecting too much of these people. She's a living woman in the aughts or whatever who's afraid of gypsies. You really think she's going to be able to go through all the hoops to get to transgender rights? It's like you're just asking way too much of people. Mm-hmm. She's got a good heart. She's just like, that's an impossible task.
Plus, what are the odds of like running into a whole group of people that have had run-ins with gypsies and they're like, they're not that bad of people.
Right. Yeah. And she's like, yeah, here's where you're wrong. I've watched gypsies slaughter millions. Yeah, and I just there needs to be more empathy for like the duration of a life, and where you start from to where you end up, and also too like I don't know if this like really adds up, but my theory with like a lot of people with like things that they can't say anymore, I think it's just like if they can't say that anymore, that means the world is changing. That means that the world they know doesn't exist anymore. That means they don't exist anymore. So when they're like, how come I can't say the N-word? They're really just saying like, I don't want to die. Like, that's really what that's what I think. It's all in baseball times. It's just Ken and I discuss it in great detail. We go between that and Abner Doubleday on our podcast.
That's a really good point though, is like, are we driven? Are we just driven? I mean, if we boil down our humanity to one basic instinct, it's we want to live.
Yeah. And I think these are representations of like, oh, you're not young anymore. If the word you used to frequently use isn't in the lexicon really anymore, then it's like, yeah, you're not relevant anymore. And that's a really difficult thing to face. So rather than face that, you just rail against it. Rather than just go, yeah, man, everybody died. I'm going to die too. Who gives a shit? Let's go bungee jumping.
Yeah, but it's that fear though. It's built up, like you were saying earlier. We don't talk about death. It's like a hot button topic. Like, I'm not gonna show up to a party full of strangers and be like, "Hey, we're all, we all have in common."
Yeah, it's so weird. Yeah, because we all have it in common, and we're all slightly scared of it because any kind of change is difficult, and that's really what it is. It's the most drastic change of all the changes that happens in your life. But it's just that. Obviously there could be a tremendous amount of pain involved leading up to it, but like the actual threshold is just that. But we treat it like it's this unspoken thing. And because of that, like it becomes so mounting and so scary when it's like, yeah, we could have been kind of laughing about this thing that's inevitable the whole time. There's just no way around it.
Right. It's not like if we don't joke about it, it's not going to happen.
Yeah, exactly. So I always find it so strange because I get other topics where you can't joke about it because it's like, it's offensive, it's this or that, or like someone has been hurt by this thing, so it conjures memories. But for death, it's like it happened. It's a universal thing, and I understand like some deaths are gruesome and untimely, but like as a concept, like it shouldn't be something that's like taboo at a show. Like it should be something that's like, I'm glad you're talking about this because I'm scared of it, so thank you.
It's probably the only natural part of life that we actually fear, I think.
Yeah,
like we grow older, that's a natural process. We have bowel movements, that's a natural process. Getting hungry, no one's afraid of getting hungry,
right?
But death is it's just as every natural thing is every one of those things I just mentioned previously, but we're afraid of this one thing because it's the end, it's the unknown.
Yeah,
that's the word right there, the unknown. Like if you're hungry, you know that you can find food and solve that. If you have to take a shit, you know that you can do that. But if like you're gonna die, what can I do?
Yeah, I find it comforting in that it's like not, and I love life and I'm very happy, but it's like there is something to be like, hey, great, it's all over, I just I don't know, and it's like going to sleep and I just never wake up. It's like that's fine.
That's why I don't understand the people who believe in an afterlife. That sounds exhausting. Like, I want it to be over. I don't want there to be anything. That's why I don't believe in a God. I don't believe in a heaven. I don't believe in a hell. I just want to be dead and gone.
Yeah, and your body gets you ready. You're in so much pain. Like if you've really like hung around, like I've had the advantage, but like in a nursing home, it's like like everything hurts. You're completely miserable. So it's like when that does come along, you're not really upset about it. You're just like, thank God, I'm so tired.
Yeah.
My grandmother lived to 101 years old.
Right.
Like towards the end, she was like, I just want, like all of her friends were gone. She didn't know hardly anybody anymore. And she just like, I just want to die. I'm like, you're 101 years old. God doesn't want you.
Yeah, that's a good point though, man. Like you get to that age, you start that egotistical kind of your part of your brain clicks in where you're just like, shit, I gotta be around here for a reason. Like, so it's gonna come up eventually, but I'm here for a reason.
You've survived like 12 presidents.
Right.
Jesus.
Oh, man, maybe I should learn how to fish finally.
Right. Yeah, you start treating it like Groundhog Day, where you're like, maybe it's this thing that I got to do. Maybe I got to eat all the cake in the diner, and that's what God wants.
We had our audition. We had an audition for SNL for her, but she didn't get the part.
Yeah. Nobody wants me.
God wants me on SNL.
Not even Lorne Michaels wanted her.
What a fun thing too, because like if they do start hiring the elderliest cast members on SNL, and they're just like, yeah, some of them are gonna die like halfway through the season, like it's gonna be a thing.
That's one way to kill off a character.
Yeah. It's like, your osteoporosis is taking a turn, so I think we might be all right.
Right, we have a strictly wheelchair. Like I feel like I'm being typecast. Yeah, you're.
Yeah.
Why am I always playing FDR?
We didn't have to kill this character off. They just died mid-scene.
Yeah. And then somebody at UCB is like, they escalated that sketch way too fast. That's
yeah. Like, you call that a second beat? How dare you do that to the Herald?
The audience wants to know that they're okay.
Yeah, my God, I can't. I'm going to do a Vulture write-up about this. I'm so upset. That would be so funny. A Vulture article about a woman really dies in an SNL sketch, and they think it's an improper second beat. That'd be so funny.
Oh man.
Have we derailed this thing yet? What's going on?
No, we are right on. We are right on course, man.
Yeah.
See, and these are the things. It's like, again, it's the denial of mortality that is humorous to me, and that's where I think a lot of comedy comes from, is because we want to put on this image of like perfection and we don't have flaws, and we'll keep those behind closed doors, when it's way healthier if we're just open about our shortcomings, our misgivings, the fact that we might be wrong sometimes, and the fact that we're gonna die.
Totally. I mean, that's my favorite thing to see in comedy, is watching someone who's not doing it. Because sometimes you will see people who've they've figured out the trick of like, oh, if I'm like vulnerable enough, or if I'm like giving enough, I'll win the audience's favor. But when you see someone who's like, oh, I need to purge these things because I think they're hilarious and I want other people to be more comfortable within themselves, like that's my favorite thing to watch in comedy. I hate to see comedy where the guy wins the whole time. It's just it's unnerving,
Right.
If her biggest fear are gypsies, there's no way she's going to get to where we want her to get, because she's starting at such an antiquated worry. And there's too many hurdles she'd have to cross in between to get to what we want, which is her to understand transgender rights. I just tried to think of, at the time, what was the most what seemed to be the most like of a disconnect with people, and that just seemed to be something that like people from an older generation couldn't wrap their heads around. But it's like, yeah, of course they can't wrap their heads around, because they're starting 100 years ago, and you have to understand that that's an entirely different world. So to hold them to the standards for today, it's just a little unfair. I understand the progress, it's just a little, the expectations just aren't quite right.
That, or we're expecting all of like of the elderly to be like Greek historians.
Yeah. It's just, they're just not. So just like it's kind of like give them a pass in this regard, unless they really are like saying things that are harmful. But if it's basic confusion, don't worry about it. It's just like they don't. I bet, if you took her, but you bore her 80 years from now, she would be on your side. It's just a gap thing. And it's like, and you're going to be her. And that's the other thing that kind of like, you have to have empathy for her, because you're eventually going to be her. So it's kind of futile to be mad at her. You're kind of mad at yourself in the future in a way.
Projection. That's, I feel like a lot of anger comes from that. It's like, oh, I see myself in that, and you're challenging who I am, but I don't want to admit that, so I'm gonna get mad at you.
Right. And it's also like, I'll never become that, so I'm worried I'll become, the real thing is I'm worried I'll become that, so I'm gonna be so outspoken against it to hide my worry.
So this isn't so much we're talking about why it's okay to laugh at old people, it's okay to laugh at ourselves.
Yes. Yeah, it's okay to laugh at yourself because this is very easily you in the future.
Right. And the gypsy thing, like, what's our fear gonna be?
Yeah.
TikTok following us, like vaccines, like
Right.
what?
AI technology, baby, it's coming
Yeah.
after you.
Yeah,
I lean into that shit, man. If you could put a microchip in my head where I'm 90 years old and I understand all the new technology because it's like implanted in my brain, hell yeah, I'm all for that.
I mean,
The
Dude,
government could use me as a weapon. I don't care.
absolutely.
in a sense, we're all cyborgs. We're just not connected to the phone.
Totally. Yeah.
Access to information. We just get to set it down once in a while.
Yeah, it's exactly like that. That hurdle hasn't been that line hasn't been crossed yet. But
I look at it as the force. Everything's interconnected, and you put that microchip in your head, you're plugged into the force. So when millions of voices cry out in pain and are suddenly silent.
Man, you're like
in an
Superman. Jeez,
Yeah.
that's a nightmare. Everybody's like Superman, where they hear a million screams at night before they go to bed. Yeah.
That one's funny because it's too real.
I meditate to the sounds of anguish.
Too soon.
I like what you do here, just from a stand-up perspective. The punchline is the fear is gypsies, and then you start the next joke
Yes.
with the punchline from the previous joke, just saying it in a different way. So fear of a gypsy takeover. She's not going to make it to transgender rights. It's a great way to kind of escalate it a little bit by using that previous reveal as the setup, and that's such a cool tool. Was that intentional?
Yeah, it was just I mean, like you with like certain bits, they kind of just come out the way they are, and like that's like 1 in a million. But then like the other ones, you're like, okay, all the parts are here. I just have to figure out how to assemble them the right way to get to where I want to go. So I think putting gypsies there, it was like, oh, it's almost like serves as like a thesis statement where it's like, oh, this is the best way to say this thesis that also is kind of funny. So it's like, so I'm building momentum in terms of like just getting like leaning people over to funny, because once they're leaned over, it's a lot easier than to get them with the punchline. So that's the intention, is like, okay, this is going to best describe what I want to do, and it also is kind of a punchline in itself. So if people recognize it as a punchline, then I'm kind of golden rolling into the rest of the bit.
And that obviously comes from a lot of experience. Those things kind of come more naturally the more you do it.
Yeah.
So you started this bit because you wanted to make this point, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Now, when you make this larger overarching point, overarching, whatever.
Man, nobody knows.
Yeah,
it doesn't matter. Yeah. I watch Frasier. I'm not Frasier.
So when you decide, okay, I'm going to talk about this is something that I care about. This is something I want people to laugh at because I want them to see kind of my point of view on this. Do you start by making that more overt thesis, and then the more you work on it, the more you replace that hitting the nail on the head with the punchline?
Yeah, I think you just learn your own voice over time. I think when I was a younger comedian, I would have, and some comedians can just do this. It really just depends on who you are up there. But like some comedians can make that overt point, and then everything grows from that overt point. But I found with me, I'm more successful if it's hidden. Like John Mulaney does a really good job of this, where it's like, oh, you don't even know that you were just told something because it's so underneath the surface. So I found with my comedy, like that worked best, where it was okay, I have a point, which is great, which is like, I think the hardest part in comedy is to have an original perspective. And once you have that perspective, for me, usually it's like, okay, how can I tie this into my own life and make this either a story or an anecdote which serves the purpose of the point I'm trying to make? Because chances are, whatever the idea doesn't just come out of thin air. It does come out of some real world event. But if I have the point, then I can kind of look for like, okay, like what's the actual event, or what's like the piece of dialogue that spawned this point? And then it's just kind of about finding it and then getting it all out the right way. And that just is repetition. I'm always looking for a personal way in, because if you present people with something personal, it's concrete. So then they go, okay, I believe it because I can see it. And then if you say your more abstract thesis after that, they're already on board because they've seen it work in the real world. Because then they go, okay, like you did support your idea up front already. Now I'll kind of go with you with wherever you're going. Rather than like sometimes like you don't give them the chance to be on off board because they can't be, because they just learned that this exists in the real world.
Yeah, I've found that if I present, so if I want to talk about something that's relevant but also controversial, is one of those things where like I love watching an audience tighten up and then releasing that tension. But I mean, that doesn't happen the first time most of the time. And so the way I like to do it is I like to present a solution that's so out there
Right.
that you can't help but laugh, because it's like, oh, that's not like it would work, but it's not, you know.
Totally. Oh, that's the best. When you present, that's like another favorite thing I see in comedy. When you present like what does hold up as like a working solution, but it's a fun and silly solution that like if you actually enacted it, it's not going to work. But like for the time being, in the moment of like, I'm in the audience, I'm watching this, it's like that makes sense and that's hilarious. You know what I mean? Like Chris Rock is like a master of that. That's like one of my favorite things that he does.
Going back to your bit, then you kind of, so that gets the big laugh. Then you open the next bit by saying she is racist.
Yeah.
So she goes from being the sympathetic figure. Now the audience is like, oh yeah, we just got reminded of what's going on. But then, you know, your whole, it doesn't bother me. And then you follow that up by supporting it with the, she's in a wheelchair, so it's not like her ideas are going anywhere.
Yeah.
Which is so funny. And I look at my parents the same way, like,
right.
Like, you know, they're ingesting Fox News all day, every day, but why am I getting worked up about it?
Right.
It's not like they're going to go out and
she can't even get on the internet. Like,
yeah.
it's
fine. I have to tell her how to like use Twitter to, you know.
Even if she could, somebody would have to wheel her over there.
That's such a funny scene. They wheel her over there to scream or rail against somebody, and then they have to wheel her back. Yeah, that was like I wanted I knew that's like, you know what's in your pocket, and you know that you're like, hey, I'm gonna say that I'm gonna let you guys know that she is racist, so that you go like okay, like what's this gonna be about? But then I know that I'm gonna tell you, but here's why it doesn't matter. And so that's like, it gives you the confidence to just say like a not controversial, but like just like a really abrupt statement like that, because you know you have a good supporting argument for it.
I mean, whatever gets the laugh. If I gotta throw my grandmother under the bus to get a laugh, I'm gonna throw my grandmother under the bus.
Man, Joan Didion said that. You're in fine company. No, like, she didn't say that specifically, but she did say, as a writer, you're a good writer when you're always selling somebody out. And like, you know, to some degree, like you have these characters in your life and you want to treat them, you love them. You know, I love them. So I want to make sure that gets across, but there's also a reason I'm telling you this. And that's because they're doing things that are hilarious. They're not necessarily right, but they're hilarious. And I still love them, but you should know, you know, I'm a comedian at the end of the day.
Yeah. You have to love your characters, even if you, the goal is for the audience to turn on that character. Like, you have to have that affection for them, otherwise they're going to be written out of hate, and that's never good.
Yeah, it's like I'm almost like glorified, like I'm attracted to how playfully wrong they are, because it's harmless, you know what I mean? And like, that's so fun to watch. Just somebody who's just kind of like, it's not really detrimental to anyone but themselves. And yeah, that's fun. Also, I don't know if that's a direct quote from Joan Didion, so I don't want any Didion heads out there to get at me, but she did say something along those lines.
We got a bunch of Diddy heads listening.
Yeah, that's
I don't want the Jonies at me again. God damn it.
Canceled by a very specific niche.
I love the one thing I love so much about that bit is the non-linear association between the two things. And they work so perfectly. How did you get those two things to connect? And like, how many different things did you try before you got those things to connect?
Which part? Like the wheelchair, she's not going anywhere part?
Yeah, that and the gypsies and what was
it? Right. The gypsies and the transgender rights.
Yeah.
The gypsies and transgender rights, I think, was easier because I remembered having a conversation with her where she said her biggest fear was gypsies. And I remember, like, you just kind of note things, you know what I mean, in your life, and then eventually you're like, oh, this is why I thought that was so funny. But
Mm.
things just kind of stand out to you, and then I was like, oh, I always thought it was hilarious that her biggest fear were gypsies. I have this thought about elderly people. This is just syncs up perfectly. And, like, you know, your brain just kind of will throw that out at you at whatever given moment that, you know, it decides to do that. But the wheelchair thing, I think, was like a little bit more difficult because, like, I really wanted people to know that because I really, like, that was trickier because with the other thing it was like, okay, I have this like empathetic idea of like it's just that, like, you know, from where she was, she's never going to get to where we're at. But with the other, with the racist one, I was like, well, she is racist, but she's very sweet. It's not harmless. So that was trickier because I was like, this is a debilitating character trait to give to somebody, but how do I also let the audience know, but it's okay? So that was harder just because the subject matter was a little dicier. So that took a little longer to get around to the idea of like, well, why is it okay? And I think I probably went through a couple versions of like, you know, whatever specifics I could find about her that would make it okay. And then eventually the wheelchair was the one that really struck me because it was like, oh, she physically, if she wanted to, can't go anywhere with her ideas. And I was like, that might work. And then with a little tinkering, it, you know, it did.
Yeah, she's not a monster. She's just an old lady in a wheelchair. Like,
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so
exactly.
before you all march down to the nursing home.
Right. You know, like you would have to visit her to access her racism. Like that's, you know.
Yeah, and that makes you the asshole here.
Not all Professor Xavier, where we could just do anything from a wheelchair.
Right. Exactly. So it's so even if she is, you know, she has these ideas, you don't need to really hold her over the coals for him because she can't enact anything. So it's fine.
Right. You build that cognitive dissonance too, because I'd be willing to bet, I'm going out on a limb here, that most of your audience isn't pro-racist.
No. I do comedy in New York City.
So
there's a reason why these bits have to be so finessed.
That's in the north, right?
It certainly is, sir. Yep, Yankee country.
Yeah, that's in that city where they raised an entire black neighborhood to build a park for your tanning and your Penguins of Madagascar cartoons. Yeah,
man, that's so funny. If someone knows the history of New York based on Madagascar, like, yeah, I've seen it. It's all zoos up there. I know what it's about.
Laughing.
Today's episode of You Can't Laugh at That is brought to you by Water Cooler Comedy. Water Cooler Comedy helps teams develop their sense of humor so that you can connect deeper, collaborate better, become more creative, and have fun doing it. Because why shouldn't work be the time and place to laugh? And these are all skills that we need now more than ever in today's changing state of work. As leaders try to find new ways to be innovative and to adapt to uncertainty and to be creative in the face of change, humor is actually a skill that workers can develop to be better at their jobs and to connect deeper with their teams. It's a skill, which means it takes practice, and that's where Water Cooler Comedy comes into play. Whether you're looking for a motivational keynote, a training workshop that brings people together, webinars, consulting, coaching, and certified classes, check us out at watercoolercomedy.org. Water Cooler Comedy makes work the time and place to laugh, so that you look forward to clocking in on Monday morning just as much as getting that first drink on Friday night.
You can't laugh at that.
The modern tree, if a tree falls in the forest. That's a really good bookend to that bit. Okay, it wraps it up really nicely.
Yeah, that I always like old, I don't know the word for whatever those whatever those sort of things are. I guess just old quotes. I don't know. But like I'm always looking to use them in bits as much as I can, just because like more often than not, like they give you like a natural bookend, kind of like what you're saying. So if you can find like a perfect place to use them, I find that they're very effective, and they're just like kind of fun to say because everyone knows them. So you can have a little fun with like how you say it, and in reference to what you're how you're trying to use it.
I'm just gonna say this right now because maybe we'll use this as a pull clip.
Sure.
But comics, if you're not listening to this episode, fucking listen to this episode. There's like gems of wisdom after gem of wisdom here. I'm like sitting here like, man, I want to be in this conversation, but at the same time, like I have so much, like you've said so much that just makes so much sense for what I'm working on currently.
For sure. I cover it all in baseball times. So
yeah. Yeah, this stuff isn't that far out in left field, that's for sure.
Nice.
Now, let me ask you this. If the Pope shits in the woods and goes around to see it, did it happen or was it a government cover-up?
I get this question a lot.
All right, let's move on to the rest of the bit. Sure. Because there's a lot there. We introduced a new character, and that's a lot
exciting.
That's a fun 2 new characters, actually.
True.
So let's dive into that, Jeremy.
Oh, why you gotta put me on the spot? I don't know the rest of it. You want me to?
Jeremy, what do you think of it?
Well, let's listen.
Why don't we listen first?
She's getting more progressive, though. She wants to get married, 90 years old. Her boyfriend, 62. I know, not even a cougar. It's a different animal. It's like a water buffalo. So here's the other thing. So she's 90, he's 62. She's also deaf. He's blind. He has one leg. It's an interracial relationship, and they met in a nursing home. And I ain't never felt more pressure to write a joke. So the first time we ever met him, I was talking to my mom about it. I was like, isn't that crazy? My mom goes, I know. I can't believe she's marrying a black guy. I was like, I can't believe that's the part you can't believe. We just met a decaying pirate. You're hung up on that? Holy shit, all right. And she also thinks the whole marriage is sexually motivated. She was like, legally. Which already, my mom is a beautician, not a lawyer. Whatever is next out of her mouth is bullshit, whatever it is. But she goes, legally, if they get married, they could sleep in the same room. Then they could do whatever they want to do. I was trying to egg her on. I was like, what do they want to do? Then she thought about it and she goes, I don't even know if they could do it. Probably just hand jobs. I know, I was like, first of all, you gotta give me a heads up. If you're gonna tell me the grossest thing I've ever heard. And second of all, nobody's marrying my grandmother for the hand jobs. She has severe arthritis. Her fingers are like eagle talons. He'd be like, not with those Wolverine claws. Get away from me, a talking rake.
Oh, man. Yeah, I heard that in a while. Another home run.
That was the first question I had is like, what is she even still capable of doing?
Yeah. It was a pretty easy A to B. You know what I mean? Because like my mom gave me that whole bit. That's like that's almost exact dialogue from our conversation. I really have been blessed with just great. I've been surrounded by great characters, and it's just like. Sometimes it's like overwhelming because I have to do a service to what the gifts they give me. So if I don't, I feel almost guilty that I'm not. But yeah, no, my mom said that exactly. And then when she said hand jobs, I was like, why would I really? It was a very quick of like, why would anyone marry my grandmother for the hand jobs? And then I was like, she does have severe arthritis. and then it was in my head. I was like, oh, I think that's funny enough to be the end of the bit. But I probably tried to write a couple more angles outside of that, and they just like I did them, and they didn't get as big of a laugh, so it just ended at arthritis. And then I was like, I really wanted to sell the imagery of how plagued by arthritis she is. So I was like, let me just add on let me just write like, let me write 50, probably not 50, but probably like 25, somewhere like that, of just like ways to describe her arthritis. And I'll just pick the funniest ones.
So this is what I'd like. I have a bit where just the weed, if weed were mandatory,
right?
Next week, that's my goal at all my open mics is in a world where weed is mandatory, punchline. In a world where weed, and then just like pick out the best ones. Is that something that you've ever done, or is that a method that you would recommend? Am I wrong?
Totally. No, you're not wrong. Because once you have, I think once you have kind of like the punchline of it, or at least like I guess the main or the like once you have the thesis down, and it's getting a laugh and it's working, then it's really fun, because then you could just open up a Google Doc and just write however many and then just pick the funniest ones. No, certain, it depends on the bit. Like the bit kind of tells you, this sounds so esoteric, but the bit kind of tells you what it wants from you as a writer. And I do think that like, the bits that give you that are the most fun, because you get to have that moment where you're like, oh, cool, I can just make a list of the darkest, funniest, most horrible things, and then just pick the ones that I think are make me laugh and are going to be the most palatable.
The visuals are fantastic. So severe arthritis, eagle talons, Wolverine claws, and then talking rake.
I had that first, and I was like, oh, I want to build to that, because if I say it right away, it's too abrupt. People are going to it's going to be too jarring for people. So I was like, let me build to that with just ones that like present an image. They're not so creative, but they'll present an image that people will laugh at, to get me to my ultimate goal, which is I want to say talking rake, because I think it's hilarious. And I think it's I think it's creative. But too soon they would back off from that.
Right. You have to be mindful of that that abruptness. That's comedy is the cheese. Because they talking rake, it might even be too abstract for them to get to right away. But if you can get their mind going towards like eagle talons, Wolverine claws, like they're like, okay, as a civilian, as an audience member, like these are things I understand. But then it's so much easier to make the jump to talking rake. It seems like a logical jump rather than like what we want to do, because we see further down the road than they do comedically. We just want to jump to the funniest thing, which is totally understandable, but their brains aren't firing like our brains are for the most part. So you kind of have to give them a little bit of a breadcrumb. Right. Yeah. The gap from setup to punchline can't be so wide that they don't understand how you got there.
Yes. Yeah.
And then you open up the bit in a way that walks them there too. The cougar, the play on cougar, like I've seen a lot of different takes on what's a different animal if they're older, and so that's like a familiar thing for them to open up the next part of the next chunk of the bit. Stating that she's getting more progressive, she wants to get married at 90. That's pretty interesting, because meanwhile, like, she doesn't want certain people to get married, so that's a good other side of the coin kind of thing. Is that done intentionally?
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of just the way that it was working out in real life. So, with comedy, like especially with stand-up, before you get a fan base and you're allowed to be more verbose, and that they trust you, so you can you're allowed a little bit more freedom. You have to get the narrative across as fast as possible, or else people are going to tune out. So, like, the real simplicity of it is that like, she she's still like a 95-year-old woman. She's going to say problematic things, but she now is in love with this black guy, and before she didn't, said said questionable things about minorities. So there was this actual change that happened in her, and I just needed to get that across as quickly as possible. So I had to do the more like racist joke, or like the it's not transphobic, but we'll just say that for now up front, to get to like, but she actually is getting more progressive, because that was the truth. It was just told by way of bits.
Yeah.
And the cougar thing, what happened there, man? Because the line I liked, because I couldn't come up, I really couldn't come up with an angle that was funnier than the premise, which was that the truth is that he was younger, he was blind, he's in a wheelchair, he's got one leg, and it's like there's no punchline that's going to be funnier than that premise. And eventually I was like, well, then maybe that's the punchline, that it's just too hard to write. And I was like, I wonder if that's too inside baseball, but I think spelling out all the things about him, people got it. Like, that's a joke where around comics, or like in more alt rooms, it would kill, and at clubs it would do well, which I was fine with. Like, I was like, that's all I want. I don't want it to bomb, but I know it's not going to get the laugh that it's going to get other places, because they're not as comedy savvy, and I'm okay with that. I'll sacrifice that.
Yeah.
And then the cougar line was literally that was from a heckler, because I would have never, because you mentioned that it's like, it's kind of a broader line. And I thought of that too. I was like, your mind just skips over it, because you're like, it's kind of an easy joke. But a heckler said water buffalo, and I was like, that's funny. I don't know. And they were like, you could use that. And I was like, I think I'm going to. And then it just was working. So I was like, all right, fuck it.
What made that unique was you said not necessarily cougar, but a totally different kind of animal.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's what made it unique in my head. I'm like, oh, okay, that's not literally like
right
putting any corners there.
Yeah.
Barely. And by the time you get to that point, you've already painted such a vivid picture of the two characters that we're dealing with in this story. So I thought that was pretty impressive how quickly you got there in my mind.
Yeah. And the water buffalo, it's kind of an obscure animal. So I think that helped in people laughing at it.
It subverts
Yeah.
It subverts the audience's pattern of thinking enough.
Yes.
It's not too far out there, because I mean, you see lions take down water buffaloes in pretty much every nature documentary anyway. So it's
right.
It's still in the same ballpark.
Right.
Talking baseball, but not too far out, in I'm not going to say that out in left field again. I've already used that. You can't use the same line twice, David.
Work, bro.
And another thing too, like you introduce all these things. She's 90, he's 62, she's deaf, he's blind, he has one leg, it's an interracial relationship. So you're introducing all this information. It's similar to the way you set up the punchline. It's similar to like a priest and a rabbi and the Dalai Lama walk into a bar kind of thing, but it's just a lot more intricate.
Yes. I just wanted to keep building upon it. So by the end of it, like, these people are like, holy shit, that is a lot of stuff. Yeah. And I felt like doing it with like in that rhythm of like going back and forth was the best way to accomplish that. Because then like people were like almost like waiting for the next thing. And then once it ends, like they're like, damn, that's a lot of stuff. And then going like, I've never felt more pressure to write a joke. They kind of go like, oh, that would be difficult. So yeah, that just it felt like the most effective way to do that.
Right. It's like almost like breaking the fourth wall.
Yes,
so to speak. Because one of the things that when I did improv, like one of the things that you learn is not to comment on the scene, because then you're not part of the scene.
Right.
And so I kind of model like how I write stand up that way. But at the same time, if the situation calls for it.
Yeah, it was the only logical conclusion. Believe me, I don't know how many angles I tried at open mics. I recorded into my voice recorder, and everyone that I listened to, I was like, it's just not as funny as the premise. And I like literally came to this idea of like, I don't know if anything is ever going to be as funny as the premise. So just try to say that and see what happens. And I did it at a mic. Obviously, it's all comics, so it crushed. And I was like, okay, so I think I'm on to something with that being the right course of action, now I just need to see if audiences are going to get it. And like I said, like the ones that were comedy savvy really got it. And the ones that weren't, the bit was structured so in a way that they felt led along enough where they still laughed. And that's all I could ask for. That's fine.
And then you introduce the conversation with your mom to
Yes.
kind of build on that joke. You know, I can't believe that's the part you can't believe. Like
Yeah.
the can't believe she's marrying a black guy.
Yeah. Once again, an exact piece of dialogue from my mom, but also to further paint the picture of like, yeah, this is how much my grandmother has changed. If my mom is saying this is the part she can't believe, like this is how powerful this relationship is for my grandma. It's made her not a racist anymore. And it's also, it's like, now you know she's not, now you know she's getting more progressive. So now you feel more apt to laugh at that part. And you also have like the other racist joke with the wheelchair. So like you kind of see her as like a little bit more of a harmless figure. So yeah, then that is an exact piece of dialogue from my mom. My mom is continually giving me gifts when it comes to comedy.
Yeah, I mean, just like the way you introduce the character too is you don't say a whole lot about them. You're not like, you know, this is who this person is.
Yeah.
You know, here's where they're from or whatever. The line of she's a beautician, so everything she's gonna say is bullshit.
Yeah.
Like that tells everybody everything they need to know. And so they're looking at her through that lens the rest of the way.
Right. Yes, exactly. Because it's like when you're up there, I think it's just more effective writing if you give them actionable character traits rather than just a list of things about what they are.
Right.
Because it's like, because then otherwise, like if you're an audience, you go, cool, now I have a list of information. But if you can see them doing something, the audience can just make the connection and go, oh, this is this kind of a person.
We think in pictures anyway, so
Exactly.
you know, being able to get them to paint that picture. And that's what I love about the decaying pirate line is that's funny by itself, but then you can literally hear the audience putting that picture together in their head. And the laugh is a little bit longer for that reason. And that's so fun.
Yeah, and I think that's a good thing too, because that's something I had to learn when you're doing jokes that then you kind of provide a visual for them that's like, you know, a little bit, it's not that it's like super complicated, but it's like a little bit more complicated than just like, here's the image. They have to think for a second. Just take a second as a performer because they will get there. Just believe in them that they will. But that's something because I would used to step over that line a little bit because I just like assumed they didn't like it, but I liked it so much that I would just keep doing it. But it took me a little while to be like, oh, they need a second to kind of put the pieces together to make what that image looks like.
Right, and everybody has their own image of it, which is you know, that's great point there. Let's move on to the last part of this bit, Jeremy.
My grandmother's boyfriend, he recently lost his shoe. We had to get him a new shoe. But he only has one leg, and they only sell shoes in pairs. We didn't want to throw the other one out. We found someone else in the nursing home with a matching missing opposite leg. Who's the right shoe size? Oh, just the saddest scavenger hunt I've ever been on. The darkest sequel to Cinderella.
Great tag.
Their fights, they get resolved drastically different. I was in there the other day, I was talking to her, I was like, what's going on? She was like, I'm so mad at Frank. We didn't talk for hours. Now we're okay. I was like, how'd you guys make up? She goes, well, we forgot what we were fighting about. That's the key to a happy relationship. It's not respect, trust, don't go to bed angry. It's dementia. Just, I love you. Who are you? Oh.
Yeah, those the shoe part, that the shoe, I actually wasn't there for it. My mom did all that, and I was telling that story as my mom did it, but it wasn't working as well. So then I was like, well, my mom doesn't do comedy. She's not going to be upset. She's not gonna be like, that's my bit. So I was like,
we think you've stretched the truth a bit.
yeah, yeah. So I was like, I just inserted myself into her position. It's strange, like I mean, that's what I like about comedy, where it's like it's not an exact science, where you can approach it like math, and it's smart to have that approach. But at some point, the art part of it takes over, where there's like kind of no rhyme or reason why things work or don't. So for whatever reason, I was telling that as like, because it was like a natural segue from my mom with the hand job. I'm talking about my mom. I'll talk about how he lost his shoe, my mom. But for whatever reason, I think because I was not part of the action at all. And I was just I was saying now what my mom had done, and I wasn't a part of it, that I think the audience felt too removed from it. So I just put myself there. But that's pretty much the exacts of what happened as my mom described.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't have to be 100% true. It just has to be funny. So,
and it's based on a true event. It's just that my mom is in a stand-up, so that story would just go nowhere. And it's like, once again, like going back to like feeling like you owe something to the characters, you owe something to the art of it, where it's like, that's so funny, and the world, not the world, whoever listens to my album would be I guess deprived of something that could bring them joy. If I have the capability to use that, why wouldn't I do it?
Yeah.
I mean, where do you feel like the line is as far as like being able to take artistic liberties with something that really happened, but not necessarily?
I mean, I whatever you do. The audience usually lets you know, like, people are pretty good bullshit detectors, especially on mass. So they kind of just let you know. For me personally, I think the line changes with every comedian and whatever your approach to comedy is. For me, it's like, it's very, very close to the truth, usually, because as I'm saying it, I'm not a good liar. So as I'm saying it, the audience will know that I'm not telling the truth. So for me, for it to be to go over, it needs to be as close to the truth, or if not like the entire truth, as possible. But it's just it depends on the kind of performer you are.
Yeah, I think that there's a way to make something that is, because I have this bit about how I get into an altercation with a whole group of ants, and because I'm Native American, I'm horrified of anything that colonizes.
That's really funny.
So I have this like thing, and I always set it up with like, there's gonna be a time in this story where you think to yourself, I don't know if this really happened this way,
Right.
but I need you to like suspend disbelief right now.
Yeah, sometimes like if you don't even have to spell it out, if you can find another detail within the story that people would go, oh, this has to be real then. You know what I mean? Like, and it could be the world, like it could be your surroundings, it could be something that's a part of the ant, but some kind of small detail where the audience then goes, this must be real, because how else would you get there?
Well, my connection of trying to make it real is like, you guys asked me like, how do you know that these ants were colonizers? Is because they spoke in a British accent.
Right. But yeah, no, because I think did you guys see that movie White Tiger? Is a Netflix movie. It was like, I think it was up for an award like last year or whatever, but it was based on a book. And like, you can always tell when stories are based on books, because they have these like little moments, or when they're based on true stories, they have these little moments that it's like, oh, a movie's not going to see that. It's like his uncle was being cremated and the fire did something to his toes. It was like, oh, you couldn't just make that up out of thin air. You'd have had to see that. So I think if you add some kind of detail like that, it helps to sell the authenticity of what you're saying.
That's a good point. You don't want the audience to feel too far removed from the story, because they're already, I mean, it's already hearsay, what you're telling them anyway.
Yeah.
And so like the closer they are to it, the more they can get out of it. Like the less, the less they have to like leap to be in on the story. Because if it's like, oh yeah, my friend's mom, or my friend did this, or
And I thought, I was like, oh, I'd introduced my mom as a character, so I thought that was like enough, where it's like, oh, they know my mom, so they could follow a story along about my mom, but it just wasn't the case. And it needed to be me at the end of the day. And I basically just followed all the steps of what she had told me. And I wrote them all down, took out the parts that I didn't need, and just kind of told it as it was. And people laughed. And the Cinderella punchline, that was what I thought was the punchline. And then I was having dinner with Sam Morril, and Sam was like, man, that story is so funny. But it was kind of like that Eagle Talons Wolverine clause, where he was like, you need a line before that the audience can identify with more, so you can get to Cinderella. And that was the scavenger hunt line.
Yeah, that was a question that I had, was like, what was the order of writing those punchlines? And at no part during the story either did you say I was the one that found the person. It was we. So you're not even saying that.
I didn't want, I couldn't stray too far from the truth of like that I did it independently, because I knew as I was saying it, I wouldn't be able to put the emotional impact behind it, because I knew it was a lie. But if my mom was still there, it was close enough to what happened, because that is what happened. I just now am added to the equation. So I could tell the story in a way that felt honest, so I could convey the feeling that I wanted to.
And then you close it with, again, one of those not like it's one of those quotes, what's the secret for a long and happy marriage?
Right.
It's don't go to bed angry, respect, trust. So those three, and then the punchline, it's dementia.
Yeah.
That's one of those. Yeah, it's great.
Anytime you can flip a known doctrine on its head, like that's a sweet spot in comedy. Whenever you can go, hey man, this is the thing we've all believed for years and years and years, I'm going to tell you why that's not true. That's where you want to be.
Why is it? Because you could kind of see that punchline coming. Like you introduce it. You pretty much give away the punchline at the beginning. I forgot what we were fighting about, and then it's not. Is that the rule of threes? Disrupting the pattern that makes that punchline still hit, even though you kind of already gave it away. What would you say?
Yeah, I think so. I think people are waiting on. I think at that moment they're waiting on like. Not the perfect sounds too much, but they're waiting on the right punchline. Because I had to give them the whole setup, because the way the events took place, they had to know what was coming, because like the joke becomes the scene. And now it's like, okay, how do I put a button on this scene which wraps it up perfectly? Because the scene itself, the end of the scene can't be the end of the joke. It's just it's got too many frayed edges on it, if that makes sense. So there needs to be just another line that ends, that is a button, and it's the dementia line, because the scene is the punchline.
Right. And then you do like a little act out, but nothing like.
Yeah, nothing too great. I always think I'm being like, I always think I'm like Sebastian up there, and like really I just like move my hand to the right. It's always like so nuts. But yeah, a little, anytime you have like a line that can anytime a line allows you to have a little bit of fun, it's like, oh man, living that fun.
Yeah. And another thing that does too is it kind of dictates when the audience ebbs and flows with you.
Yes.
So like you have the big punch of dementia, and you don't want to go right into the next chunk on that high. So you got to guide them to where they need to be. And I feel like that's your whole album. It's just that, that ebb and flow, and really well put together.
Thanks, man. Yeah, I tried as hard as I could to create a narrative within the confines of, doing shows at a VFW in stand-up. You know what I mean? So thank you.
I think we hit all the buttons. Normally we go through the bit first and then break down the construct of, why we can and why some people can't laugh at the certain topic, but we really knocked that out up front. I think we answered it in a way that connects with a lot of people. Is that no, your resistance to laughing about this group of people is more of a reflection on yourself than it is the group of people.
Yeah, I do think so. People. You always see it with crowds, with people in crowds, like where like they're bringing whatever they're bringing to your jokes, but you can't. You'd never met them, so how would you know anything? You know. So whatever their personal trauma is or personal experience, they're bringing all that into what you're saying, which is that's a tough matchup. You know, you write to try to I keep that in mind, but it's like, yeah, of course you're gonna miss. You don't know everybody in the world.
My takeaway from this is if you really want to write a funny bit, know Anthony's mom.
Man, you're not off, man. You're really not off. Like,
well, it's really, I mean, people hand you setups all the time, and we get so into ourselves. We get so into like, oh, this is making me feel a certain type of way, and I'm more focused on that than the fact that they're giving you something, whether you're a comic or not.
Yes, man. My mom is just continue. It's like, honestly, it's too much. Where it's like it's too much to delineate all of it. Everything out of her mouth, I'm like, that is very funny and probably could be a bit, but I'm overwhelmed by the last 8 things that you said.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Hold on, I'm gonna record you. Like, just have your your phone on record at all times.
Man.
I had something like that similar. Like, I did this true story. You had to tell a true story in stand up, and the story was like you had to tell 2 things that you didn't do that were shitty, and 1 thing that was true that you did, and the audience could try and pick which one was.
One of the 2 truths and a lie, or one.
The real one ended up. So the things I chose were, I gave my best friend who just got a new condo an upper decker, or I TP'd my neighbor's yard, or I played a porn at a loved one's funeral. And the real one was the loved one's funeral.
Right.
And no one picked that one. And so I had to tell the story. And halfway through it, I'm like, it is a real story. It really happened.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, I actually do have something here.
Oh, totally, man. You have you absolutely porn at a loved one's funeral. I mean, like that's the obvious choice, just because it's like, yeah, like you added specifics. You know what I mean? Like the upper deck, like it's like porn. That's very specific, and you definitely have a bit there. I wouldn't even need to hear the rest. That's absolutely a bit.
Well, you're not getting the rest.
You got to come to Cleveland for that shit.
This isn't the time for that, Anthony.
Yeah. What would you, if you were to offer advice to somebody who is resistant to laugh at this topic, and then follow-up question to that, if you're a comic trying to make this topic funny, how can you find the humor in this?
Other than
both cases. Yeah, other than have your mom.
Yeah, I guess for the people, just have them investigate exactly why they're upset. Even once they find what they think is the reason, then break down why that is the reason for them. Just get to the core of what it really is, because it's like, it's almost undoubtedly, I mean, obviously you see some bits where you're like, yeah, I know exactly why that's wrong. But you know, there's other bits where it's like, yeah, there's probably something you're bringing to the table to make you feel that way. So just investigate the feeling. Also too, that like that's a fun search in and of itself. And for a comic, in terms of like approaching these topics, is start with exactly what you want to say about it, and then once you have that, just if you care about it that much, you'll figure out a way to make it palatable for everybody. And like keep in mind why they're not laughing, because sometimes people won't, sometimes people don't laugh, it's just not funny. But then other times people aren't laughing because they're just apprehensive for some reason. So if you can write the material to ease that trepidation, do that. But yeah, listen for why it's not working, and like just stick to the core of what you're trying to do, but just finesse the rest.
Well put. Steve, is there anything you want to throw in? Okay. Cool, because that's usually the case.
You got the same stuff out of them.
Yeah. Oh man, I always do that at the end of every episode. Steve, anything like after our guest like throws this like deep explanation as to why things are funny and what people can do to find them funny? I'm like, Steve, anything you want to throw in? He's like, no.
How do you follow that?
Yeah, exactly.
The difference between Steve and I. Steve's got nothing. However, I still got 45 minutes. So finally, my time to shine.
All right, and go.
Nope, that's it.
Well put, Jeremy. Well put.
Succinct.
We can all pretend like we edited
Efficient.
out what I said. We'll pretend like we edited out what I just said.
Right. There's no fat on it at all. You nailed it.
Mind blown. Yeah, you can follow me on Instagram at comedian Anthony DeVito. I am. You can go to my website anthonydevitocomedy.com for all shows, and then I'll just let you know I'm in Bloomington, Indiana, at the Comedy Attic, July 15th through the 17th. And if you live in the New York area, come see my one-man show. My Dad Isn't Danny DeVito, August 14th at Union Hall at 7:30. And this was a pleasure, guys. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks for coming on, and thank you for helping us prove that no matter how resistant to our own mortality we are, there is always a way to laugh at that.
You can't laugh at that.
Special thanks to Golden Ox Studio. You can find Golden Ox Studio for all your podcasting needs at goldenoxstudio.com. Hit up Jeremy. He is fantastic to work with, a professional. He makes podcasting easy. And if you've been kicking the tires on starting your own podcast, definitely give Golden Ox Studio a look.
If you'd like to weigh in on today's topic, follow us on Twitter at YouCan'tLaughPod, or like us on Facebook at You Can't Laugh at That, and tell us how you did laugh at today's topic, or how you didn't. This is all about the conversation, is what I'm saying. All right, bye.